Q Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuneReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com, that is INFOR@CUNEREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976, that's 0141 772 3976.
The Herald Scotland on Wednesday the 13th of September 2023. From the news section. Labour warned over hypocrisy ahead of Tories' short-term Let's vote. An article written by David Bole and read by me, Corey. Labour MSPs have been warned against rank hypocrisy and shameless opportunism after suggesting they could change their tune and oppose Scotland's already delayed plans to crack down on Airbnb-style short-term lets. The Scottish Conservatives are forcing a last-ditch vote on whether to further delay the licensing plans for short-term lets past the October 1st deadline at Holyrood today, despite the Scottish Government repeatedly rejecting calls for another extension. SNP Housing Minister Paul McLeland has warned that operators who fail to sign up to the scheme before the October 1st deadline could receive a £250 fine if they continue operating. As of September 5th, data from 27 council public registers showed 3,537 licences have already been granted, while a further 3,643 are being considered. The Minister said no applications had been refused, and transitional arrangements are in place to allow hosts to continue operating while they await approval. Ahead of Wednesday's vote for a further 12-month delay, rural business organisation Scottish Land and Estates, SLE, has added its voice to calls for the deadline for businesses to apply for short-term let licence to be extended. SLE claimed that measures to comply with licensing, such as obtaining various types of certifications, were simply unfeasible for many businesses, given the shortage of contractors in rural Scotland. It added that many members were facing 6-month waits or more to be able to get a booking arranged with a tradesperson. Stephen Young, Director of Policy at SLE, said, "Rural Scotland, far more than urban areas, is heavily dependent on tourism for its economic and community success. If the Scottish Government chooses to proceed on the path it is on, it may well be to blame for hundreds if not thousands of these businesses closing, with the resulting impacts on other local businesses such as retail and hospitality also needing to be factored in." But Scottish Greens housing spokesperson Arane Burgess has insisted that the legislation has been a long time coming, adding that it will make a real difference. She added, "It is a watershed moment for housing in Scotland. Everyone should have access to a warm and affordable home. There is of course a place for well-managed holiday lets. Yet, from villages in the Highlands and Islands to busy tenant stairwells of our cities, homes are being crowded out by holiday lets. This is driving up prices and hollowing out our communities. The debate has focused a lot on the views of holiday let owners, but it is also vital that we hear from the families who are coping with increasing rents, the young people striving to get their first home, and the community groups who want to see a better balance between weekly stays and more stable communities." 3 Labour MSPs, including Edinburgh's Daniel Johnson, have backed calls for an extension of the deadline for businesses. Miss Burgess said, "It is no surprise what side the Tories have picked in this debate. But today's vote will be a big test for Labour and the Liberal Democrats. The Labour Welsh Government is introducing a similar scheme based on the Scottish example. I hope that Labour MSPs put principle ahead of party politics and support the changes which have been 4 years in the making. Anything else would be rank hypocrisy and shameless opportunism. Fiona Campbell, CEO of the Association of Scotland's Self-Caterers, said, "Short-term let licensing is not a panacea to housing challenges, and any suggestion that it is risks giving false hope to communities. Instead, we need a holistic and evidence-based approach to solving the housing crisis, not simplistic solutions targeted at small businesses who provide a significant economic boost, particularly in rural and remote areas. Regulating holiday lets out of existence will not lead to a flood of affordable homes on the market. In fact, it will likely lead to increased second home ownership with no commensurate economic benefit that you see with self-catering and B&Bs. The similarities between the Scottish Government's policy and the proposed Welsh scheme ends at the word licensing. The ASSC would gladly support the fair, low-cost and responsible system from the Welsh Government in place of what we have in Scotland, which is unworkable at best and unlawful at worst." That is from the Herald Scotland. It was written by David Bole and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 13th of September 2023. From the news section. Prisons Inspector warns delay to Barlinnie rebuild would be travesty. An article written by Tom Gordon and read by me, Corey. It would be a travesty if the Scottish Government delayed the replacement of Glasgow's Barlinnie Jail again, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons for Scotland has warned. In her annual report for 2023/24, Wendy Sinclair Gabin also highlighted overcrowding problems across Scotland's 15 prisons, which acted as a barrier to rehabilitation. She said there was a lack of strategic clarity for tackling numbers and a continued use of antiquated Victorian facilities that breached human rights guidelines. The routine over-reliance on HMP Barlinnie for surge captivity when prisoner numbers are high accentuates the risks until the new HMP Glasgow is built and becomes operational. Miss Sinclair Gabin was also concerned at the treatment of mentally well people after inspecting 4 prisons last year: Castle Huntly, Ardee Inverness and Shotts. She reported, "I was genuinely concerned to see so many acutely mentally unwell people being held in custody while awaiting inpatient care. There is no doubt that prison staff were doing their best, but noted they had to cope with profoundly distressed patients who should have been in hospital." The Herald reported in June that the replacement for 130-year-old Barlinnie, the country's largest jail, was facing yet another delay. Priced at £170 million in 2015, with a 2018 start date, the project has been delayed by difficulties finding a new site, and latterly by rampant inflation in the construction sector. It is now expected to cost more than £400 million and open in 2027 at the earliest. In the foreword to her report, Miss Sinclair Gabin effectively urged ministers to find the money to replace Barlinnie and Inverness Jail. She wrote, "Scotland has demonstrated the ability to achieve significant justice reforms in the past. We now need to see the same commitment and focus to drive further reform with innovative thinking that can deliver a justice system Scotland deserves, but still within an appropriate funding envelope." However, while recognising the difficult fiscal challenges facing the Scottish Government, it would be a travesty to see any delay in the arrival of the much-needed HMP Glasgow and HMP Highland. Tory MSP Russell Finlay said, "This damaging report confirms the many warnings from prison staff about the catastrophic conditions inside Scotland's jails. It must serve as a wake-up call for SNP ministers." Crumbling Victorian-era prisons, rampant drug use and lack of basic resources is endangering staff and making rehabilitation impossible, thereby continuing the cycle of crime on our streets. Yet this complacent SNP government has no sense of urgency with the desperately needed Glasgow and Highland prisons already subject to significant delays. Scottish Liberal Democrat MSP Liam MacArthur added, "Scotland's prisons are not serving prisoners, prison staff or the wider community well. If government is serious about breaking the cycle of reoffending, we need to see a properly funded justice system that can deliver robust and credible community sentences where appropriate." A Scottish Prison Service spokesperson said, "We welcome the Chief Inspector's report and her continuing recognition of the outstanding work of our staff in challenging circumstances, particularly in the face of a rising population. While it is not for us to determine who should be sentenced or reprimanded to custody, the impact of our establishments is significant. We are managing a rapidly rising and increasingly complex prison population, and many of our establishments are full beyond their design capacity. The safety and well-being of those in our care and our staff remains our priority. These pressures are increasingly restricting our staff's ability to do the quality work that supports the personal development, rehabilitation and chances of successful reintegration into communities for those in our care." A Scottish Government spokesperson said, "While prison is needed for those who pose a risk to public safety, we recognise the imprisonment rate in Scotland is high, and we are taking action to address that. That includes ongoing work to implement our national strategy for community justice and protecting investment in community-based interventions, which we know are more effective at reducing reoffending than short-term imprisonment. The well-being, safety and human rights of all those who live in our prisons will continue to be a priority for the Scottish Government and the Prison Service, and we will work with them and our partners to respond to specific issues raised in the report." That was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Tom Gordon and it was read by me, Corey.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday, the 13th of September 2023, from the Voices section. Labour's Rayner cheered to the rafters at TUC conference. This article is by Alison Rowett. Humza Yousaf is a poor Nicola Sturgeon tribute act. Keir Starmer's Labour is a 1990s tribute act or a Blair tribute act. You can see why the insult is having a moment in politics. As a way of calling someone an absolute duffer, it is seemingly light-hearted yet brutally effective. It was Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, who fired the barb in the direction of Starmer, but she is hardly alone in accusing Labour of backing down from the promises it has made. From the TUC conference in Liverpool to the campaign trail in Rutherglen, the concern is the same. Can Labour be trusted to deliver in government? Yes, was the unsurprising answer from Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner when she addressed the conference yesterday. She was among friends and comrades, being introduced by the chair as one of us and Labour's finest. For many Labour members and among people outside the party, Rayner would make a better leader than Starmer. But is she the real deal, or is Rayner, in turn, just a John Prescott tribute act? Nick Robinson, interviewing her on Today, did not frame the question quite so starkly, but he arrived at the same destination. Was she the John Prescott to Tony Blair, a great end-of-the-pier show, but someone with no real power. Ouch. I think I'm more of a Barbara Castle, countered Rayner. She is fond of comparisons with the Labour legend. Who wouldn't be? The pair have a lot in common ideologically, particularly in Castle's later years. Both are stylish, impeccably turned-out women, although I would bet the house that the Labour minister never wore Doc Martens or some of the other shoes Rayner favours. Castle did not do clumpy. Both strong women, not afraid of a fight. The list of similarities goes on. Yet there are so many differences, beginning with their lives before politics. Castle was the daughter of a tax inspector. She was brought up in a comfortable home by steady parents who believed in the power of education and socialism. The grammar school girl went to Oxford, read PPE, became a journalist, and then an MP. You might say Rayner's story was the stuff of soap opera, but no teledrama would dare to be that bleak. Born and brought up in a council estate, mother bipolar, Rayner was her mum's carer from the age of 10. Pregnant at 16, she left school with no qualifications. Just when it seemed the doomsayers were right about her not amounting to anything, her life began to turn around. She was allocated a council flat, went back into education, became a carer for elderly people, joined a union, and rose quickly through the ranks. At the age of 35, she was elected the MP for Ashton-under-Lyne. The rest is headlines. A home, a job, a chance. These are the bones of Raynerism. And the delegates in Liverpool liked what they heard, especially the bit about how joining a union changed her life. She had some meat to add to the bones, including a cast-iron commitment to bring in a workers' rights bill in the first 100 days of a Labour government, 0 hours contracts banned, an end to fire and rehire, a right to flexible working, a proper living wage. Labour would also bin the Conservative anti-strike bill with its minimum service guarantee. Taken together, this New Deal for working people was not nothing. TUC General Secretary Paul Nowak said it amounted to the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation. The Conservative said the mask had slipped, revealing the same old anti-business Labour. So what is it to be? Labour is selling out workers or giving them too much power. It is in the pocket of business or in thrall to the unions. The reality sits between the extremes, which is as it should be this far off from a general election. Parties are in the business of winning friends and convincing voters, not alienating vast sections of society. Even so, Labour had already jettisoned or watered down some of its promises before Rayner got to her feet yesterday. The £28 billion Green Prosperity Plan is to be scaled back. Tuition fees in England will stay. Most controversially, Labour will not lift the 2-child benefit cap, a Conservative austerity measure rightly described by Rayner as obscene. Every time a Labour spokesperson is asked to commit to any spending outside the core business of keeping the country going, the answer is the same. We can't, because we don't know what state the economy will be in when the Conservatives leave. In place of education, 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 the mantra is stability, 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 and it is becoming just as tiresome. You can see why people might be unsure about where Labour stands. The voters are clear about what they do not want, and that is the Conservatives. In a YouGov poll published yesterday, 54% said they would definitely not back the Tories. That is sea change. Can't stand another minute of them. Potentially landslide stuff. But there is no guarantee where disillusioned voters will go, or even if they will vote at all. At such times it is crucial that the leadership of the main opposition party keeps its nerve. If Labour is not going to change anything or very little, why should people bother voting for them? Rayner knows from experience that it is practical help that changes lives. But there has to be some hope there as well, a belief that things can change for the better, and it will not take forever. Barbara Castle was, and continues to be, held in such high regard because she got things done, be it introducing speed limits, breathalyzers, or compulsory seat belts. She made promises and kept them, even when it was far from easy. Angela Rayner is an inspiring figure. She would be an asset to any party. If by some weird magic the SNP had elected her as their leader, independents might have been here by now. Joking apart, Labour needs more can-do Rayners and Castles, and fewer people saying no to everything all the time. If there is one constant in the months ahead, it is that voters don't want business as usual, from Labour or any other party.
This is from the Herald on Thursday the 14th of September 2023, from the news section. Glasgow. Mounted police deployed to city shopping centre. This article is written by Craig Williams. Mounted police have been deployed to a Scottish shopping centre to deter antisocial behaviour. Officers based at the Pollok area of Glasgow have also been sent to patrol Silverburn shopping centre. Greater Glasgow Police Division said that proactive deployments will remain in place at the shopping centre to provide reassurance to the community. It comes after a 13-year-old boy was arrested at the centre after allegedly entering the premises with a baseball bat. Back in April, First Bus threatened to pull a range of evening services operating in the Silverburn area due to a rise in arson attacks on its buses. The bus operator said the attacks were putting its staff and bus passengers at risk. Meanwhile, gangs of youths were slammed back in March for terrorising staff at a McDonald's at the centre with vile racist taunts and physical attacks. Teenagers have vandalised the restaurant, hurled racist and physical abuse at staff, and intimidated customers, prompting calls for parents to step in and sort out their children. That article was written by Craig Williams. This is from the Herald on Thursday the 14th of September 2023, from the news section. Nicola Sturgeon sets up artistic creation company after book deal. This exclusive article is written by Tom Gordon. Nicola Sturgeon has set up a company to handle the income from her outside earnings, after signing a lucrative deal for her memoirs. The former First Minister registered Nicola Sturgeon Limited at Companies House last week, using a small accountancy firm in Fife. The nature of the business is given as artistic creation. According to the official filing, the firm is a private company limited by shares, with Miss Sturgeon named as the sole director, sole shareholder, and the only person with significant control. Her occupation is given as politician. Last month it emerged Miss Sturgeon was writing her political memoirs for a reported advance of at least £150,000. Publisher Pan Macmillan said it would be a deeply personal and revealing book from one of the most significant political leaders of our time. Miss Sturgeon said at the time, "I have loved my life in politics, but ever since I was a child I have harboured an ambition to write. I will talk about what I am proud of and be frank about my regrets. A spokesperson for Miss Sturgeon said, "Now that Nicola has signed a book deal and is putting pen to paper to provide a real understanding of her life over the last few decades, this is an appropriate administrative step." The Glasgow Southside MSP has also previously talked about writing fiction. Miss Sturgeon's time as SNP leader remains under police investigation as part of a long-running probe into the party's finances. Miss Sturgeon, her husband, former SNP Chief Executive Peter Morrell, and former Treasurer Colin Beattie were all arrested and charged between April and June. Officers are investigating if £660,000 raised by the SNP specifically to fight a second referendum was spent on other things. The SNP's newly published accounts for 2022 shows an £800,000 deficit and liabilities exceeding assets by £220,000, suggesting the money is no longer available. Miss Sturgeon, 53, has been an MSP since 1999 and was Deputy First Minister from 2007 until 2014, before taking the helm after the no result that year. She announced her resignation in mid-February and formally demitted office in March. Last week she made her first speech at Holyrood since leaving Bute House, calling for less polarised political debate. Miss Sturgeon's predecessor, Alex Salmond, also set up his own company in 2015. The Chronicles of Deer Limited is still used to handle the proceeds from book publishing and television programming and broadcasting activities. Mr. Salmond wrote in a referendum diary, "The dream shall never die," after leaving the office, and in 2017 started a weekly chat show on a Kremlin-funded TV channel. Disgraced former Finance Secretary Derek Mackay also set up a one-man consultancy, Loughan Associates, 2 years after quitting after pestering a schoolboy with sleazy texts. That article was written by Tom Gordon. This is from the Herald on Thursday the 14th of September 2023, from the news section. Rishi Sunak fails to give firm pledge on keeping pensions triple lock. This article is written by Tom Gordon. Rishi Sunak has refused to commit his party to supporting the triple lock on the state pension beyond the next general election. The Prime Minister stopped short of giving a categorical yes when asked if it would make the promise by SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn. Mr. Sunak said he remained committed to the policy in principle, but did not provide a time frame. The triple lock currently guarantees the state pension will rise in line with the higher of three options: average earnings, inflation, or 2.5%. The Office of National Statistics, ONS, yesterday reported that average earnings in September were 8.5%, which would ordinarily set the bar for the rise in April. The rise last year was 10.1%. It led to calls for a rethink of the policy, which was started by the Tory-led coalition in 2010, with former Tory leader Lord William Hague calling it a costly runaway train. Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride also admitted that in the long term the triple lock was unsustainable, and there was speculation the policy could be suspended to help the Tory government find £600 million for tax cuts ahead of the next election. At PMQs, Mr. Flynn said that, as someone who spends more money heating their swimming pool than the total value of the UK state pension, Mr. Sunak was not especially invested in the issue. But he went on, "Let's afford him the opportunity to clear up any confusion. Will he commit his party, the Conservative Party, to maintaining the state pension triple lock beyond the next general election? Yes or no? Mr. Sunak replied, "This is a party that introduced the triple lock. This is the party that has delivered a £3,000 increase in the state pension since 2010. It's also the party that's ensured that there are 200,000 fewer pensioners living in poverty today. And this winter ensuring that pensioners get an extra £300 alongside their winter fuel payment to support them through the challenging times with inflation. So, Mr. Speaker, our track record is clear. There is one party in this House that has always stood up for our pensioners, and that is the Conservative Party." Mr. Flynn said, "I don't think we heard a yes there. You'll imagine my shock, my utter surprise, that we appear to have a consensus once again between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party on this most important of issues. Despite the promises that were made to the people in Scotland in 2014, and despite the clear statements from the likes of Gordon Brown that the only way to protect your pension is to remain within the UK, how hollow those words are now. I ask the Prime Minister, who does he think will scrap the state pension first, his government or the Labour Party's government?" Mr. Sunak said it was thanks to the UK government that pensioners in Scotland were getting record increases in their state pension of £870 this year, and other help. This is the government that introduced and remains committed to the triple lock. But he does raise a good point. Pensioners in Scotland should know the reason that they can rely on the state pension, not just for today, but for years to come, is because of the strength of our union and the strength of our United Kingdom government. Later, Ashley Dalton, the Labour MP for West Lancashire, said she was still confused on the issue after Mr. Sunak's exchange with Mr. Flynn. She told the Prime Minister, "Just yesterday, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said that the pensions triple lock is not sustainable. The Chancellor's economic advisers have suggested that it is time to review the policy. But Number 10, when questioned, have said they've committed to it. Which is it?" Mr. Sunak replied, "This government is committed to the triple lock. It was this government that introduced the triple lock." She might want to have a word with her own deputy leader, who I don't think provided much clarity on the matter. I think we all know and remember that when it came to pensions, what we can remember is Gordon Brown's 75p a week increase. Speaking after PMQs, SNP MP David Linden said, "It's increasingly clear that Scottish pensions are under threat from the Tory and Labour Party cuts, with Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer both failing to back the triple lock. Unlike Sunak and Starmer, the SNP is committed to the triple lock. We oppose yet another increase in pension age and will always fight to protect pensions from Westminster cuts." That article was written by Tom Gordon.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 14th of September. From the Voices section, opinion. The referendum that never was has left space for real politics. By Seniors feature writer Rebecca McQuillan. Hear that? It's the sound of silence. Earlier this summer, talk of an independence referendum finally went quiet. Like a broken car alarm, it had been drowning out discussion of just about everything else in Scotland for years. No more. Since the SNP leadership contest descended into a big scrap, and Nicola Sturgeon spent a day being questioned by police. Even the most nationalists have stopped mentioning it, at least in public. Hamza Yousaf's programme for government speech made no reference to it. Discussion of a referendum has become unobtrusive and occasional. Most people will have few regrets about that. The problem is not the legitimate, honourable aspiration to have another vote, but the highly theoretical nature of the whole question and the dominant position it's had in Scottish politics for 10 years. Rightly or wrongly, there hasn't been a single moment since 2014 when the Scottish Government has looked like it had been in a position to deliver a second independence referendum. My 8-year-old asked me the other day what would happen if there were a volcanic eruption in Arthur's Seat. She wanted an action plan because it could happen. There have been times when discussion of a referendum has felt a bit like that. It's had a fictional quality, with the UK government feeling no obligation to agree to a vote so soon after the last one, with polls consistently showing a lack of enthusiasm out there in Scotland for another one at any time soon, and with voters evenly split between yes and no. The political pressure for one just hasn't been there, even with a majority of independents supporting MSPs at Holyrood. The magma chamber is half empty. Yet, if Arthur's Seat had erupted, and Nicola Sturgeon had had her way, we would have been in the feverish final stages of a referendum campaign right now. Ms Sturgeon announced the vote would be held on Thursday, October the 19th, 2023, 5 weeks from now. In this alternative reality, Sauchiehall Hall Street would have been full of people in kilts and saltire capes, right now handing out leaflets. The BBC would have devised a new referendum graphic. We'd have been picking over televised debates. A tetchy argument would be taking place about which side's cyber supporters were more unpleasant. Neil Oliver would be saying batty things, and Yes Strategists were having sleepless nights trying to manage Alex Salmond. The nature of the Scotland-England border would be dominating radio phone-ins. Families would be divided. Some would be high in emotion, others would be hating every minute of it. Of course, it never happened, because the Supreme Court predictably ruled that Holyrood didn't have the competence to hold it. And so, instead, for the first time in ages, with the constitutional question in abeyance, we've been talking about other things. For the last 6 months, the focus of Holyrood's debate has noticeably changed. The chat has been about actual stuff, like hospitals and the cost of living and ferries and heat pumps, and housings, and schools, and regulating short-term lets, rather than the ifs, maybes and whens of independence. Even the SNP's special conference on independence strategy in June was a muted affair. It's a much more productive way for MSPs to spend their time. It's not just falling public support for the SNP that's responsible for this change, but its list of failures in government. In recent months, ministers have had to defend poor performance on the overdue, over-budget Western Isles ferries, and the creaking state of Calmac's fleet, record numbers of homeless, drugs deaths, the schools attainment gap, NHS waiting lists, ministers' ropey relationship with business, the deposit return scheme, and the overdue duelling of the A9. What all of these have in common is that they are issues of long-term management. After 16 years of SNP government, the opposition can either show clearly that our ministers' own targets have been missed, or that ministers have failed to prevent foreseeable problems they were warned about. Mr Yousaf has been getting flack for all of it. The only appropriate response is one of humility. That wouldn't sit well with strutting about demanding another referendum. This isn't a settled situation. The current peace and quiet around a second vote won't last. The issue will arise at the SNP conference next month. Delegates will pick over Mr Yousaf's underwhelming proposition that if independent supporting parties win a majority of Scottish seats at the general election, it will be used to pressure the UK government on a second referendum, or even to start negotiating independence. This is, in turn, a rehash of Ms Sturgeon's de facto referendum, although with the bar set lower, a majority of seats rather than votes. So the issue is still there. Impatient independent supporters will expect Mr Yousaf to justify his narrowly won position as party leader by pushing hard to make independence magically happen, so a degree of Sturgeon-style theatrics are inevitable. It's unsurprising that Mr Yousaf is intent on a showdown with Westminster over the Gender Recognition Act, in spite of fractional support for it at Holyrood and voter misgivings. He will want to make Labour squirm by demanding assurances that if Sir Keir Starmer enters Downing Street, he will honour the Scottish people's democratic will expressed at the ballot box by agreeing to a second referendum. That's in spite of the obvious dangers to himself of that approach. The SNP leader has proposed a plan to push for a referendum that hinges on winning a majority of pro-independence MPs, but its ability to win those seats, even on a voting system that massively benefits the SNP, looks more uncertain than ever. But that's where we're headed, and when we get there, all the chat about the metaphysics of referendums and pseudo-referendums will return. For now, though, its absence has brought about a broadening in the public debate. It has come out of the realm of constitutional fantasy to focus on everyday reality. It's a refreshing change and gives us a small glimpse of what Holyrood would be like if we finally resolved the biggest question in Scottish politics. And that was a comment piece by Rebecca McQuillan.
Herald Scotland recorded on Wednesday 20th of September 2023. Arts and Entertainments, Herald Diary, Charles Dickens and the Barroom Conundrum by Lorne Jackson. Pun fun. Journalists are rightly celebrated for our numerous engaging characteristics. Our work ethic, brackets, we work several minutes a day, some of them even consecutive, close brackets, our abstemious natures, brackets, we never order a drink at the pub. Instead we patiently wait for a non-journalist chum to order, then request a quadruple whisky with a champagne chaser, close brackets. Perhaps our most adorable quality is our ability to cobble a pun together at the drop of a hat. The diary has now discovered that young scallywags have been impinging on our territory by inventing their own puns. Reader Simon Leach informs us that his son plays a football-based computer game on his mobile phone, where competitors use pun-based pseudonyms based on footy players they are particularly fond of, which has inspired Simon's son to dub himself Neymar Food in the Fridge. A piggy tale. Retired primary teacher Margaret Ralston gave her young charges numerous and valuable lessons in life and provided answers to their many questions, though she admits that there was one curious scholar who asked a question that left Margaret stumped. Said the little fellow, "If Scottish folk call a dog a dug, why don't we also call a hog a hug?" Liquid laughs. We recently mentioned an eminent Victorian novelist in his most famous creation, a little workhouse lad turned clumsy pickpocket, which inspires reader John Hutchison to regale us with a rib-tickling yarn. Charles Dickens walks into a bar and orders a martini, says John. The barman asks, "Oliver Twist?" Mathematical mating. Unlucky in love reader Kathleen Gibson gets in touch to tell us, "The graph of my past relationships has an X-axis and a Y-axis." Dear John, the ego has landed. We recently challenged our readers with the Magnificent Seven test, where they had to attempt to read an entire diary column while still remembering the name of the least famous actor in the cowboy flick, The Magnificent Seven, brackets, a bloke called Brad Thingamy, if we seem to recall, close brackets. Regular contributor John Mulholland gets in touch with an outrageous confession. "I failed the test," he admits, "not because I can't remember things I've read. It's just that when I start reading a diary story, I immediately skip to the next one if there's no mention in the first two lines of the name John Mulholland." Brackets, bloomin' cheek. From now on the diary's referring to him as John Thingamy, close brackets. Half-baked humour. "I entered the baking competition and came in last," sighs reader Pauline Ferguson. "It was a worst cake scenario." By Lorne Jackson.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Friday the 15th of September 2023. From the news section. University of St Andrews, Scottish University named Best in UK. Report by Jodie Harrison. A Scottish university has knocked Oxford and Cambridge off the top spot in a National League table for the second time in 30 years. The University of St Andrews has been named the top university in the UK and Scotland by the Times and Sunday Times Good University Guide, with the University of Glasgow named as Scottish University of the Year. The Prince and Princess of Wales met while studying at the university in the early 2000s. Published annually, the Times and Sunday Times Good University Guide aims to provide the most comprehensive guide to higher education in the UK. The guide evaluates everything from satisfaction with teaching quality and the student experience through to degree completion rates and graduate employment prospects. Following St Andrews in the Scottish University rankings is the University of Glasgow, which has jumped one place from last year. First Minister Hamza Yousaf attended Glasgow, as did former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. The University of Edinburgh came in third, dropping one place since last year. Further north, the University of Aberdeen has jumped one place to 4th, after coming 5th in the rankings last year. It leapfrogged Glasgow-based University of Strathclyde, which has dropped one place to 5th, after coming 4th in last year's rankings. The University of Dundee has stayed in the same position at 6th. Glasgow Caledonian University and the University of Stirling switched places in this year's rankings, with the Glasgow-based university coming in at 7th and Stirling dropping down one place to 8th. In Aberdeen, Robert Gordon University has jumped one place in the rankings to 10th place, and Queen Margaret University Edinburgh has also jumped one place to 11th. But fellow Edinburgh-based university Heriot Watt has fallen 3 places in the rankings to 12th. Both Abertay in Dundee and the University of the West of Scotland retained their places of 13th and 14th respectively. The rankings did not include the University of the Highlands and Islands. Principal and Vice-Chancellor Professor Dame Sally Mapstone, FRSE, said, "To make history, becoming top in both the Times and Guardian University Guides in the same season is a special way to start a new academic year in St Andrews. This achievement belongs completely to our fantastic staff and hard-working students. It reflects a deep institutional commitment to a critical balance of world-leading research and teaching and the ways in which St Andrews students respond to that. While positive external validation is always welcome, no Vice-Chancellor ever sets out to top a league table, and what matters most to me are the individual and collective experiences of those who study and work at this great university. St Andrews never stands still. We are always looking for ways to improve what we do. I think everyone who works and studies here will be delighted to see that culture reflected in where St Andrew now sits as a sector leader." Helen Davies, editor of the Times and the Sunday Times Good University Guide, said, "The higher education landscape has never been tougher. It is more competitive to get a place at many of our top institutions. The cost of attending university has soared, leaving graduates with extraordinary debt, and in many cases campus life still bears the scars of the pandemic. Meanwhile, lecturers are on strike and the marking crisis is a running scandal. It means any prospective student, parent or carer needs to think hard about whether university is the right choice, and then where to study and what subject. It's where this guide, our 30th edition, is here to help. Our online version has so much more on how the universities compare subject by subject, a guide on campus life and what scholarships and bursaries may be on offer. We are here to champion the ambitious work of our first-class universities and the aspirations of any student of any age who wants to keep on learning." That report was by Jodie Harrison.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 18th of September, from the news section, Stirling Health Tech Firm steps up fight against cancer, by Deputy Business Editor Scott Wright. These are exciting times for Emblation, the Scottish health technology specialist. The company, which recently celebrated its 15th anniversary, is in the midst of moving its headquarters from Alva in Clackmannanshire to a new £4 million base at Castle Business Park in Stirling, complete with views of the castle and, when you gaze towards the horizon, the Wallace Monument. The move takes place as Emblation undertakes 3 major clinical studies. It is exploring potential new uses for Swift, its portable medical device based on microwave technology, which has already successfully treated verrucas and warts in thousands of patients. It is a much better opportunity for us getting the right calibre of staff in, said Chief Executive Gary Beale, who co-founded the company with Eamon McLaren in 2008, about the new HQ. "We are less than a minute from the motorway, so it's great for commuting. Stirling, at this moment, is getting a lot of money pumped into it. Its infrastructure in terms of rail network is all pretty good for us, and there's a park and ride that passes our door. It makes it a lot easier for people to commute. Alpha was a great place for us to have started off. We had been there for 15 years. I think we had just outgrown the wee county. While Mr. Beale said Emblemation could have set up its new headquarters anywhere, the decision to remain in Scotland owed much to the networks it has established over the last decade and a half. Mr. Beale and Mr. McKern were working for US-based Boston Scientific when they started up Emblemation, but they decided to base their new business in Scotland because of the support on offer, including from the high-growth startup unit now run by the Scottish Enterprise, to get them investor ready. We did a fundraise in 2009, backed by high net worth investors in Central Scotland, and managed to raise enough to develop our first products, Mr. Beale said. Pretty much from there it has gone from strength to strength. We could have done it anywhere, but the networks we had in Scotland made it far from desirable to relocate my family again. Asked if that network is strong for new businesses in Scotland today, he said, "There is a great life sciences sector within Scotland, and I think the whole of the UK. Scotland has a lot of up-and-coming and established medical device and pharmaceutical companies. I think it is a great place to be." Mr. Beale studied engineering and completed a master's degree in digital systems at Herald University in Edinburgh before undertaking PhD research into medical microwaves. He was headhunted by a medical device business called Microcellus, which is working on microwave technology, while working for a Ministry of Defence company, and helped to set up its UK headquarters in Hampshire. It then established a research arm in Scotland. Mr. McKern joined Microcellus, where Mr. Beale and a former colleague at Heriot-Watt, Peter Smith, became directors, while studying for his PhD at the institution. While Mr. Beale and Mr. Smith worked for Microcellus in Boston, Mr. McKerlin was based in Hampshire. Mr. Beale then joined Boston Scientific after the firm began to struggle. Shortly thereafter, both he and Mr. McKerlin felt they could go it alone and put wheels in motion to establish Emblemation. By harnessing their academic know-how and innovative approach, Emblemation has built its name with medical devices that can be used to treat a host of dermatological and, it is hoped, different forms of cancer using microwave technology. Crucial to their endeavours has been the success in cutting down the size of microwave systems that were used before Emblemation began, that were the size of large under-counter fridges like large ovens and trolleys. We're only a few kilos in weight compared to what was previously 30 kilograms to 50 kilograms, Mr. Beale said. Innovation is really what drove the company to where we are now. A further crucial event came 3 years ago with an investment from Apposite Capital, a London-based private equity firm focused in the medical sector. The funding has allowed Emblemation to accelerate its scale-up plans, grow its team from around 23 to 65 in the UK, and acquire a company in the US that was formerly its distributor in October. Emblemation now also has a subsidiary in Germany where it has 75 staff and looking to get about 100. Today, the Swift device is in place around 2,000 locations, primarily in dermatological and podiatry-based clinics, where as many as 350,000 people have been treated for warts. Our post-market clinical data is showing efficacy significantly higher than any other product on the market at this moment, Mr. Beale said. It also currently has 3 major studies underway that are hoped will produce major leaps forward for the technology in different areas. 2 of the studies relate to podiatry. The Swift device has been trialled for its potential treatment of common or plantar warts, and also for fungal nail infections, which although affect huge numbers of people around the world, and are frequently the main reason for visits to podiatrists, are not treated particularly successfully. The prevalence is phenomenal worldwide, so to get a clinical indication and be able to treat that condition effectively would be an amazing outcome, Mr. Beale said. The third study now underway in Germany and the US concerns the treatment of actinic keratosis, aka a skin-related sun-damaged condition that can potentially become malignant. What we are doing is treating this precancerous lesion using microwave, Mr. Beale explained. We have already done a study in the University of Dundee where saw effectiveness in the 90%. This is really the trial to give us the ability to put that clinical indication in place to allow us to publicise those efficacy rates. He added, the opportunity of securing funding for these up-and-coming oncology-based clinical studies is something that is quite exciting. Over and above these optimised controlled trials, Mr. Beale said Emblation has a plethora of case studies and feasibility studies going on, covering a whole gamut of clinical conditions, cancerous and precancerous lesions, as well as other viral-related lesions. Meanwhile, the company, which Mr. Beale said has developed the smallest, most compact microwave system in the world, has been approached to work alongside major medical companies on development projects. It currently has one system approved to treat soft tissue ablations and can ultimately be used in cancers of the lung, kidney, breast and liver. We have a few thousand systems out in the market. They are supplied under white label to the medical device company. He said, they, I believe, have done in excess of 1 million treatments, so that is obviously a life-saving achievement that has very much been put to great use at this moment. Emblation now has more than 200 patents, with a portfolio that Mr. Beale says is constantly evolving. Asked if the company would seek further investment to drive its growth ambitions, Mr. Beale said, absolutely. The cost of some of oncology-based studies goes into the significant millions, and we would need to raise money to do those. We've got some exciting work going on in the feasibility and case study work that we are doing. That will allow us to have the grounding for getting additional funding for those clinical opportunities. We do expect it to get to the size that we want to get to and create the revenue that we are projecting will require additional funding. Q&A. What countries have you most enjoyed travelling to, for business or leisure, and why? In the mid-2000s, before starting Emblation, I lived near Boston, Massachusetts. Since then, I have travelled extensively through North America, both in business and with my family. The weather obviously shapes your opinions, but San Diego and Cape Cod are two of my family favourites. When you were a child, what was your ideal job? Why did it appeal? I was always interested in speed from a very young age, and I still remember the sounds and smells of the RAF air shows my parents and siblings frequented annually. I even applied to be a trainee pilot in my teens. My constant quest to understand how things worked and how to bridge gaps all played a major part in becoming very tech-centric. Emblation was born from this. What was your big break in business? Having worked for a number of microwave technology companies, both medical and industrial, I could see the technological limitations at this time, which prevented companies from embarking on developments in microwave medicine. My company's big break was overcoming those technological barriers, which allow us to develop and manufacture the world's smallest and most portable medical microwave systems for use in cancer treatments as well as skin conditions. This allowed us to partner with one of the world's leaders in medical microwaves, a partnership that is still going strong. What was your worst moment in business? Our worst moment, more a period, in business was definitely during the global lockdown, because this impacted not only our ability to get our Swift product out to our customers, given all the clinics were closed, but it also halted the clinical research we had scheduled relating to investigating potential cancer and pre-cancer treatments using Swift. Who do you most admire and why? It is difficult to put a finger on a single individual, but what I do admire is a person with grit. Determination and drive of an individual, even when someone is frantically waving a white flag in front of you, takes a lot of courage and focus. When the goal is clear to you, the likelihood of success is much higher. What book are you reading and what music are you listening to? I am close to finishing Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran. I heard about this book while listening to a comedian's podcast, and it has astonished me how far greed and deceit will take some people. Music plays a huge part in my life, so picking one song is almost impossible. However, I have picked up my guitar again after a long hiatus, and I'm teaching myself an old favourite, Pride and Joy, by Stevie Ray Vaughan. And that report was by Scott Wright.
From the Herald, Monday, 18th of September 2023. Sports section. Booing of Anthems, the least of Tartan Army's transgressions, by Graham McGarry, senior sports writer. One of the last things I would want to do is sound anything like Richard Keys, believe me, but I found myself thinking of his infamous line of defence as the Tartan Army booed the English national anthem last week, and the England fans responded in kind when Flower of Scotland was aired. There is a line where rivalries between groups of football fans can cross, from being simply dismissed as banter, but for my money, the booing of your biggest rival's national anthem just about crawls under that bar. You may think differently. Scotland hero Ali McCoist received huge stick from many who've idolised him for stating he was offended by the Tartan Army's behaviour at Hampden. The added complication being, of course, that God Save the King is also the British national anthem, and national identity can be a complex thing in our complicated little country. You may also think that the booing of any national anthem at all smacks of disrespect, and that's fair enough too, but for me it falls into the pantomime category, as did the loud retort of the Rangers support at Perth on Saturday, who sang, "You can shove your Tartan Army up your arse." All good, not so clean fun. I'm not so naive as to say that politics should be kept out of football. They go hand in hand. But there seems to be a narrative that supporting Rangers and supporting Scotland is now incompatible in a post-referendum world. You can't support independence if you're a Rangers fan, and you can't support the Union and support the Scotland team. Expert opinion shows that a great many fans are indeed yes supporters, and Rangers fans will still make up the largest section of the Scotland Supporters Club. It's almost as if social media isn't actually the real world, but I digress. I don't defend the booing of the English anthem because I want to propagate the image of the cuddly Tartan Army, though with their, here's that dreaded word again, banter and their kilts and their Glengarrys and their friendly ambassadorial nature. Much of that image is accurate, but it also disguises an increasingly sizable fringe of the Scotland supporter base that do indeed bring shame upon themselves and upon their country. What seems to have been lost rather than the Anthemgate aftermath is that the booing was the least of our worries at the national anthem. It was during and after the minute's silence for the late great Craig Brown and victims of the recent tragedies in Morocco and Libya that were the real cause for criticism of fan behaviour. Yes, it could be argued that many in the English support were provoking a response as they drunkenly and loudly slurred England, England during the silence. But whatever your views on the monarchy, it is difficult to square indignation over a lack of respect being shown to the deceased, with a lusty course of Lizzies in a box by way of response. The classy Brown would surely have been disappointed to hear thousands of Scottish fans belting it out. Later in the game too, we were treated to numerous rendition of Harry Kane's Amongo, a word used to degrade and dehumanise disabled people in the same way that spastic once did. It was surely already gone the way of that term and becoming unacceptable to use in any context. So it's difficult for me, at least, to get too exercised about a bit of booing when this sort of thing is also going on. No doubt there will be many who indeed see all of this as banter or fair game when it comes to the low bar set on the football terraces. But there are many within the Tartan Army who will piously criticise the old firm for the abhorrent songs and chants often heard at their games, while turning a blind eye to unacceptable behaviour within their own ranks, dismissing it as a bit of a laugh. You can't have it both ways, and a section of the Scotland support absolutely, in my view, crossed the line from rivalry into repugnancy, and in doing so, demolished the notion of exceptionalism that is often evident when discussing the Scotland support, that we are different and somehow better than other groups of fans. The Tartan Army have long enjoyed a stellar reputation. They raise funds for charities in the countries they visit and have built much of that reputation on their aversion to violence. You're unlikely to see Scottish fans hurling plastic chairs across some German square next summer, for instance, and that contrast to the conduct of the English support is worn proudly and justifiably like a badge of honour. That is all well and good, but the reputation will soon take a hit if the section of the Tartan Army who think it's fair game to sing songs glorifying in death or ableist ditties, no matter who they are directed at, don't clean up their act. That article was by Graham McGarry.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Monday, the 18th of September 2023. From Voices section. Immigration enriches our society. I'm glad to see attitudes changing. Report by Daniela Thies. I just spent a weekend in Timisoara, the largest city in southwest Romania. Those aware of the country's more recent history may know it well. It is the place the revolution against the communist regime started in 1989. Across from the impressive Orthodox cathedral that looks towards the old town, our tour guide pointed us towards bullet holes still visible in the facade of the apartment buildings across the street. However, the reason for my visit is that Timisoara has been named the European Capital of Culture, alongside two cities in Greece and Hungary this year. It is easy to see why. Some call it Little Vienna. So much do some of the buildings resemble the Austrian city, showcasing the shared historical architecture remaining from the Habsburg Empire times. While accurate to an extent, such a catchline does not distract from the city's uniqueness or all the other influences that make it what it is. Stand in the middle of Piazza Uniri, Union Square, and you can see it. Baroque buildings beside Art Nouveau architecture, a Serbian Orthodox church near a Catholic cathedral. There is a reason for this, my tour guide told me. It is because the square was constructed by a large variety of architects and influences: Russian, German, Serbian, Jewish, and more. Beyond architecture, this hot pot of diverse heritage is present throughout Timisoara. Look closely at what is the oldest pharmacy in the city, and it still has signs in 4 languages. Only a short distance away, the Romanian opera is side by side with the Hungarian opera and the German opera. The latter two share a building. They even have diplomatically divided up the window space to equally share posters of upcoming events in each venue with passers-by. Nearby, a statue erected after the revolution has names inscribed in it. It is not the names of revolutionaries, but just a list of people living in Timisoara at the time the statue was created. The diversity of names meant to represent the diversity of the city. Still, while there does seem to be a vast amount of influences in what is a smallish city, Timisoara is just over 300,000 residents, it is not the only city or country hugely influenced and enriched by immigration. Looking at my birth country, Germany, one of my favourite examples is the doner kebab, which has become almost just as much of a national dish as the bratwurst, so much so that claims it was invented in Germany have stuck, despite counter-arguments that similar dishes have existed longer in other countries. Whether it was invented or adopted, the reason the hugely popular food exists is because of the increase in the Turkish population in Germany, which happened as a response to a severe shortage of workers in Germany in the late 1950s and early 60s. At the time, Germany needed workers and Turks answered the call. Of course, the doner kebab isn't the only way German society has been enriched by migration, but it is a fun and tasty one. Here in the UK, talks about immigration have very much been part of our everyday news cycle, and unfortunately hardly ever for the positive ways in which it has shaped and continues to shape the nation for the better. Things we see as the backbone of our society, the NHS for example, were very much built through immigration. The Windrush generation was a huge part of the labour force in the early years of it. I almost hate myself for once more using food as an example, but even this nation's much-loved fish and chips are said to not have been a standalone British invention. Instead, it assumed that frying fish this way was the adoption of Portuguese, Jewish and Dutch practices, while chips are said to have French roots. While combined here, the dish is far from 100% British. It might not exist were it not for migration. Just like beloved food, every single person likely has roots somewhere else. In fact, millions of people in the UK pay money to discover them. According to previous research by YouGov and Ancestry, one of the big providers of DNA ancestry research, nearly 5 million Brits used DNA testing to seek out their genetic ethnicity. When it comes to results, the more diverse the better it seems, judging by the few people that have decided to share their findings with me. Yet, instead of celebrating the ways that immigration has positively contributed towards our society, for so long migration has been viewed through a negative lens. Worse, politicians in our country have turned towards demonising it. Throughout their time in office, the Tories in Westminster have turned towards blaming migrants for problems caused by their own actions and policies. During the cost of living crisis, a decrease in quality of life, closure of public spaces, and the visible impacts of an overstretched and underfunded health system, Conservatives have continuously decided to point the finger away from themselves and, in an attempt to distract, turn it towards immigrants, and for so long it seems people were buying it. Like other issues, Scottish independence and Brexit for example, UK society's view on immigration has been highly polarised, often due to political point scoring employed by politicians on the matter. Still, there seems to be some change in attitudes, at least in Scotland, and that I am glad to see. According to research for Migration Policy Scotland and the Diffley Partnership released last week, almost 3/5 believe immigration has a positive impact in the country, while the number of people wanting lower immigration levels has dropped from 58% in 2014, the year a similar survey was last conducted, to 28%. However, while such numbers are a welcoming change, there needs to be a change in how those in power talk about migration, because the fact is migration is, and will continue to be, a massive and vital part of our society. To talk about the future, those at the helm need to embrace more rational and constructive conversations around migration instead of fueling division without providing solutions. Back in Timisoara, diversity is being celebrated by the city as part of being named the European Capital of Culture 2023. According to representatives, the region currently hosts over 30 cultural communities, and this cultural palette is the added value of the city. This year, all residents are urged to shine your light, light up your city. It is a play on words. In 1884, Timisoara was the first city in continental Europe with electric street lighting, something people here are very proud of. But the slogan also refers to the future. It is an invitation to a double mobilisation for residents, for them to shine their inner light through their morals and values, but to also participate in changing their city for the better through everyone contributing towards it. Timisoara has and continues to recognise that diversity is a good thing. It invites open conversation from everyone on what the future should hold. That, I think, will only be a good thing. That report was by Daniela Thies. This is from the Herald Scotland on Monday the 18th of September 2023. From Voices section. The Herald Diary, Old American Glory. Report by Lorne Jackson. Old Glory. America is a relatively young country, which possibly explains why there is no Stonehenge in Central Park and precious few moated castles along Hollywood's Sunset Strip. The people who govern the USA, however, are not especially fresh-faced and frisky. Joe Biden has been in the politics game since the glory days, when he helped George Washington evict the pesky Brits from their American perch. That was in the fabled past, of course. Nowadays, Joe has all the vim and vigour of an antique hat stand. Luckily, he has an adult son, a chap named Hunter, who makes up for Daddy's vapidity by being a very energetic fellow indeed. Reader Nicola Munro says this has led to some interesting political discussions at home. The other day she was watching an evening news report about Hunter's busy life, when her husband turned to her and said, "I wonder if Joe Biden also has a daughter called Gatherer." Hard to swallow. More topical news. Reader Don Murphy notes that in Bristol, a savvy entrepreneur has opened an alcohol-free pub. Don wants to do something similar. I've decided to open a food-free restaurant, he says. Customers will get empty plates and a hefty bill. Perfect for rich people on a diet. Age of Enlightenment. The diary is celebrating Scotland's marvellous education system. Daniel McColgan from Bishopbriggs overheard a conversation in a Scottish cafe. Two chaps were ordering food and a member of staff asked where they were from. One replied he was American. The other, although Scottish, said he lived in Paris. The member of staff, clearly a scholarly sort, eager for enlightenment, inquired where that was. The name game. There have been several violent incidents involving the American XL bully, which has now been labelled a dangerous dog. On a thankfully lighter note, reader John Mulholland spotted that a BBC report on the matter included an interview with a chief inspector from the RSPCA's Special Operations Unit. His name was Ian Muttett. Boxton. It was the 60th birthday of reader Mary Andrews Hubby at the weekend. He celebrated with a dinner party, where he made a speech to the assembled guests. The highlight was when he said, "I always wanted to be someone off the telly. I was hoping I'd end up like Cumberbatch Sherlock, or Steed from the Avengers. Turns out I'm Jim Royal." Jokey job jabber. Ambitious reader Harry Bradley says, "I've decided to move to Seoul. It's bound to be a good Korea move." That report was by Lorne Jackson.
The Herald on the 19th of September, and the news section. Scotch whisky, extraordinary 74-year-old malt goes on sale by Kirsty Dorsey. Elgin-based Gordon & MacPhail has added an extraordinary 74-year-old whisky valued at £35,000 per bottle to its private collection range. Gordon & MacPhail 1949 from Glenlivet Distillery was laid down in a refill sherry butt on New Year's Day 1949 and bottled on March 6, 2023. Retaining a cask strength of 49.3%, only 192 bottles of the ultra-rare whisky are available for sale. Having been aged for more than 7 decades, it's among one of the oldest Glenlivet released by Gordon & MacPhail. It is also the company's last ever 1949 cask from Glenlivet Distillery. To find a whisky of this age is absolutely extraordinary, whisky writer Dave Broom said. What comes across immediately is the fruit. There's a richness and there's a depth. You have this wonderful interplay of distillery character of oak and oxygen. It's a gift that keeps on giving. When you taste it, you taste time. You can taste all the vintages and everything that's happened. The concentration of fruits, the layers, and the complexity are off the scale. You think it's an old whisky, but it's not just an old whisky. It's an extraordinary whisky. Ewan McIntosh, managing director at Gordon & MacPhail, said, "Patience, knowledge, skill, and a commitment to quality are all principles exemplified in this greatly aged single malt." Gordon & MacPhail 1949 from Glenlivet Distillery is extremely scarce. Our very last cask of Glenlivet from 1949, making it a must for whisky enthusiasts looking to savour a remarkable, greatly aged single malt exuding layers of character and decades of maturation expertise. Founded in 1895, family-owned Gordon & MacPhail has bottled spirit from more than 100 Scottish distilleries, developing unique experience of how to mature single malts for many decades in their own casks. It owns the Benromach Distillery in Forres and the Cairn Distillery in the Cairngorm National Park, and recently announced that from 2024 it will no longer fill casks with spirits from distilleries it does not own. However, whiskies carrying the Gordon & MacPhail name will continue to be released from the company's existing portfolio of rare and sought-after malts for the next several decades. And that was by Kirsty Dorsey. The Herald on the 19th of September, and the news section. Glencoe, search scaled back for missing hill walker by Craig Williams. The search for a hill walker who went missing while hill walking in the Glencoe area has been scaled back by mountain rescue teams. Charles Kelly left his home in Tillicoultry on Wednesday, September 6 to go hill walking. The 56-year-old last contacted his family about 8 p.m. on Thursday, September 7, but there has been no contact since. A major search operation was launched, including helicopters, dogs, drones, and 10 different mountain rescue teams, including civilian, RAF, and police. Mr. Kelly's rucksack was found on Saturday, September 9, and despite the search covering a massive area of terrain, there has been no trace of him since. After 10 days of intense searching, Glencoe Mountain Rescue Team, JMR, said they have made the difficult decision to scale back the search for Mr. Kelly. In a statement, JMR said it's still very much our aim to bring Charlie back to his family. GMR and other teams will continue to search on a part-time basis as and when the weather allows, and volunteers have time between work and family commitments. However, if new evidence comes to light providing a focused area to search, the response may be stepped up again. To that end, we are asking once more for people to think back to the 6th, 7th and 8th of September. Were you at Glencoe Mountain Resort, Meal a Bur, or surrounding hills, Crease Clach Lethwand, Ben Mick Chasgaig, or possibly you may have seen in Glen Etive? If you were there, please check back through your photos of the day. Was there someone in the background of your summit selfie? Also, we would like to hear from anyone who's found a pile of orange peel on the hill in this area. We know Charlie had 2 with him, but there was no peel in his bag. This may help us work out his route. Charlie is believed to be wearing a black waterproof jacket, grey trousers and a dark green fleece. He was last seen with a pair of walking poles. Charlie is described as having a distinctive, unusual gait due to a hip problem and may have been moving slowly. Please help us bring Charlie home by sharing among your hill-going friends. And that was by Craig Williams. The Herald on the 19th of September in the news section. Scotland Air, second LA-bound flight in 2 days, declares emergency, by Craig Williams. A second flight bound for Los Angeles has declared an emergency over Scotland in the past 2 days. Delta Airlines flight DL-187 from London Heathrow to Los Angeles ALX made a U-turn over Glasgow around 6 p.m. on Monday evening. It did so shortly after declaring a squawk 7700 while travelling at an altitude of 34,000 feet. Footage from Flight Radar app Flight Radar 24 showed the flight then landing safely at London Heathrow at around 7:11 p.m. Unconfirmed reports online suggest the reason for the diversion was because of the flight deck crew felt unwell. The Herald has contacted Delta for more information. It comes after a Virgin Atlantic flight bound for Los Angeles declared a mid-air emergency over Scotland on Sunday evening. Flight VS-23 from London Heathrow, operating on a Boeing 787 aircraft, declared squawk 7700 while flying over the Hebrides. Virgin Atlantic later confirmed that the aircraft returned to Heathrow as a precautionary measure as a result of a minor technical issue. And that was by Craig Williams. The Herald on the 19th of September and the news section. UK criticised for shameful culture war as GRR case gets underway. And this is by David Ball. UK ministers have been accused of using trans people as part of a shameful and cynical culture war as a legal fight over Scotland's blocked gender recognition reform gets underway today. First Minister Humza Yousaf announced in April that he would take Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack to court in a bid to overturn his use of Section 35 of the Scotland Act to veto the Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill. The The legislation was passed by MSPs from all parties in December in what was thought to be the culmination of one of the most terse political issues in the history of devolution. But Mr. Jack announced in January he would use the Section 35 mechanism for the first time to stop the bill gaining royal assent. Passed overwhelmingly by MSPs in December, the bill would make it easier for trans people to obtain a gender recognition certificate by removing the requirement for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, as well as dropping the required age and shortening the time for the applicant to live in their acquired gender. Today, lawyers from the Scottish and UK governments will begin a 3-day hearing at the Court of Session in Edinburgh before Lady Haldane, after Mr. Yousaf pressed ahead with legal action at the use of the Section 35 by Mr. Jack. Scottish and UK government lawyers will on Tuesday begin a 3-day hearing at the Court of Session before Lady Haldane ahead of the court case beginning. The Scottish Greens have accused the UK government of having scapegoated, demonised and ridiculed the transgender community as part of a shameful and cynical culture war. Scottish Green MSP Maggie Chapman said the case marks an important week for Scottish equality and democracy. She said, when our Parliament overwhelmingly voted for gender reform, there were trans people across our country celebrating. After years of debate, it had finally been passed. Now they will be watching anxiously as a court discusses their rights. Gender recognition reform was passed by a significant majority of our Parliament, including MSPs from all parties. It was a small change, but a proud day for Scotland that helped bring us closer to international good practice. Ms. Chapman added, our trans siblings have waited far too long for rights that many of us take for granted. My heart and my solidarity goes out to them. Everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, and to be recognised as the person they are. GRR has always been a simple step towards doing that. Yet, UK government ministers and others have knowingly scapegoated, demonised and ridiculed a small and vulnerable minority as part of a shameful and cynical culture war. It is shocking that we have been put in this position. If the Section 35 order is allowed to stand, it will set a terrible precedent for human rights and devolution. If the UK government succeeds in overriding the decisions of our Parliament, then we can be sure it won't be the last time they try it. But Scottish Conservative Deputy Leader Megan Gallagher said it was disappointing that members of the SNP Green government are determined to double down on the reckless gender self-ID bill, when a majority of Scots firmly oppose it. She added, the public recognise, as women's groups and many of my Scottish Conservative colleagues warned last year, that this legislation compromises the safety of women and girls. Those legitimate concerns were arrogantly dismissed by the Nationalist Coalition, as well as Labour and the Liberal Democrats, who shamefully whipped their MSPs to vote for it. As well as endangering women's safe spaces, the bill impacts on equalities legislation across the rest of the UK, which is why the UK government had no option but to issue a Section 35 order. Instead of admitting the SNP Greens got this badly wrong, Humza Yousaf is choosing to squander taxpayers' money on a needless and unwanted court battle to manufacture constitutional grievance. A UK government spokesman said, the Secretary of State for Scotland made a Section 35 order to prevent the Scottish Government's Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill from becoming law because it would have an adverse effect on reserved matters, including on the operation of the law as it applies to Great Britain-wide equalities protections. The UK government will robustly defend the decision to prevent the Scottish Government's Gender Recognition Reform Bill from becoming law. And that was by David Ball.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and tell your friends about our service.